hands down, this needs to be fixed. Whenever you're talking about one isolated move changing how the basic structure of the game works, how the game controls, that shouldn't be that way. There's something in the drive rush system that they messed up with along the way, and they weren't able to fix this. Again, I think Capcom knows about this. I don't think they have a good idea of how to fix it.
Are we at the point where we're willing to risk the butterfly effect potential in order to directly try to attend to this BS? Because I gotta say, even understanding it when it happens, I'm like, yeah, okay, I get it. And technically, maybe that's on me to update and understand, and there was a way out, and I just needed to delay or whatever. I don't know, man. How much am I going to do this before I'm like, yeah, I don't want to try to adjust to this. I'm going to go play Mortal Kombat 1, which is not a good example because I don't think Mortal Kombat 1 is a very well-designed game.
Welcome back to another episode of EventHubs Talk and Block. I am John Catalyst Gray, and with me as always is John Velociraptor Guerrero.
And we brought with us Stephen DreamKing Chavez as well today to talk about one of the most emotional and one of the most frustrating things that are circulating through Street Fighter 6 social media and just the ether right now in general, and has been pretty much since the game started a couple months back, and that is inputs. And it's something that has been very, like I say, frustrating for many players. It's very hard to put a finger on exactly what's going on in a lot of these scenarios, and there are a handful of different scenarios that I think deserve some attention here. But what I want to do with our discussion, at least at the beginning here, is kind of just air out how we're feeling about these things, because a lot of the times you go, I've been playing fighting games for a decent amount of time, I know when things are supposed to happen and when they're not, and Street Fighter 6 is not acting like the games that I am used to. In fact, most of the time it acts correctly, but in every so often something will happen where it doesn't do so, and it costs me dearly, and then I'm drive rushed all the way into the corner, yada yada. We all have been there. So I just want to go around the horn first and foremost and say, Steven, have you been frustrated by Street Fighter 6 inputs lately?
Yes, absolutely. As a lot of people know, or some people know, I'm a Lily main. I think Lily is probably the character who suffers the most from like the weird input issues that we're seeing in this game. And it feels like it's an amalgamation of a lot of different things or several different things. So it's, as you said earlier, it's hard to kind of put a finger on it. But for me, it's the Windclad buff for Lily. It's a quarter circle back punch motion. The amount of times I get random SPD instead or something else, it's kind of insane. And I've lost several matches because I had somebody stunned in the corner.
Sure.
You know, did a wind buff, walked up, did something, or walked up and tried to do wind buff, got a light SPD instead. There goes my full stun combo. There goes my whole opening. And it's all over kind of thing. But it happens so often. I mean, I played some ranked matches earlier today. Happened 4 or 5 times to me. I mean, it's a lot, man. It happens pretty consistently. It's a bummer.
Mm-hmm. John, you've played a handful of different characters at this point. What's the input experience like for you?
Drive rush is the worst because it's I see someone drive rush, I key in my input to counter it, and it doesn't come out, and the input just gets eaten. And I don't know why. I don't know why the game stores inputs like this or doesn't store inputs like that. It reminds me actually of Super Turbo from back in the day. Whenever you entered a super into that game, it would eat your opponent's inputs pretty much every single time, depending on the super that you did. And that's really what drive rush reminds me of. I don't know what the heck is going on with the game in that scenario, but that's complete. I see the most from the most people out there, and it's the one that gets me the most often.
Now you're saying when your opponent drive rushes in at you and then you try to respond, and can you be a little more specific too? Like, is it a sprint? Like, are you trying to block? Are you trying to do a reversal button?
Hit like a medium punch with crouching medium punch with JP to blow him up, basically. You know, to basically counter the drive rush coming in, and it like doesn't come out when you would expect it to. You got to basically mash the input, I should say. The input gets masked plenty by the game itself, but if you mash the input, it will sometimes come out like when you want it to, but sometimes not. And it's like what the heck is going on here? Like why does the game not read inputs correctly in that scenario?
And so we won't go too far into it here because I've done a little bit of research on this, and I want to give us a shout outs right now. We'll reference him again later, but Big Nasty Kale has been one of the community members that has done a lot of research on this and has posted a few videos or at least Twitter clips. and has really explored it. And what we're gonna find is it maybe is not as bad as we think it is, but that's gonna be a question for everybody to kind of answer for themselves once we get there. And as for me, the situation that I find most consistently frustrating, and just about every single time, in fact, more than once every single time that I sit down for an online session, online or offline, I will have an issue with getting things usually on my wake up. And no one's going to give me any sympathy here, but I'm going to share it anyway, that OD amnesia on my wake up sometimes does not come out at all when I feel like it absolutely 100% should. And this is indeed tied to drive rush and my opponent using drive rush. And so, okay, there's a lot there, and there are a lot of different arenas where inputs seem to be sort of finicky. So let's dig into a couple of them here. Steven, you mentioned that Lily seems to be a character that is...
Before we move on from Amnesia, I do want to say that is one particular input, actually, that has been changed from Street Fighter V to 6, where it has an additional 2 frames of less input buffer that you're able to work with there. I know we're going to get into it later, but that specific move has been changed from 5 to 6 by quite some margin.
When you say that specific move, you mean the input of down? The
down.
Okay,
yeah, the down input, because previously it was like, the coward crouch, a few other moves. That is far more common in Street Fighter 6, that down input in this game than it was in the prior game. And they really tighten the window on that one.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So, Steven, you say as a Lily main, you kind of experience this sort of a thing maybe more than any other individual character. You want to get into the particulars there of what you're seeing?
Yeah, so obviously the big key to Lily's gameplay, what her entire game plan revolves around, is getting wind buffs. You usually do that by either doing a raw one with light punch, or you do it from the medium or heavy strike, and you can do that from block strings. There's a whole meta game to that where you bait people if they want to DI you or whatever. But a lot of times you're doing it from full screen or from further away raw, so you can buff up when the opponent gives you space, or say you get a command throw and you're full screen now. It's a perfect opportunity, assuming they don't have a long range fast horizontal punish like some characters do. Generally you're using that move so much because that's where all of Lily's anything kind of lies. You need wind buffs to play that character. So you do it a lot. You do it a lot in different situations. You do it during her set play. And so, if you corner your opponent, you knock them down with a wind-clad spire. A lot of times the goal is another raw wind buff, and then you continue, right? But there's times where maybe you moved a little, or maybe something happened. You get a random SPD. Now you're fully vulnerable when they wake up. Now you've completely lost your positioning. You're getting punish countered. It's a whole thing, right? But that's the biggest thing I've noticed with that character. There's definitely other issues, but that's probably the number one thing that I think I run into with that character, where it's just used so much. And I was playing this morning, and one of the things I like to do now is after a command throw, I'll do raw drive rush, but I'll cut it short with a wind buff. So it's kind of a bait, but it also lets me power up, right? So many times I go for that, I get SPD, and it's because it's probably reading the forward input of the drive rush or whatever, right? There's something being stored there that if I do it, then I get SPD instead a lot of times. So it's trying to be extremely precise, but then it's also there's a level to which you can be incredibly precise all the time when playing online, right? There's a limit. You can't be, your inputs are never going to be perfect all the time. It's just not going to happen.
Also, I wanted to ask everybody, please feel free to jump into the comments and share with us your most egregious input issues that you've been experiencing with Street Fighter 6, whether you feel like it's just your own problem or you feel like it's something that the developers need to tweak about the game. All good. It's good to have a conversation about this kind of a thing so we can air it out, figure out exactly what it is. Capcom addressed something along these lines recently with their Aki patch, and that was with supers. The leniency or the window for where you would need to get all of the different inputs for a super was so wide that it would be easy to just be maneuvering around in the neutral, and then somewhere in the last 20 minutes you've inputted a super, and as soon as you press punch, there it is. There's your level 3 out of nowhere where you really don't want it. You experienced that as well, Steven?
Oh, a ton of times. Yeah, it's usually I dared to walk forward, then walk back and do wind buff, and there goes my level 3. I'm full screen away, complete waste, getting fully punished, and it's like, come on, man. Like, I just walked back and forward. I'm playing footsies, man. Like, that's all I'm trying to do is, and there goes my level 3, and it's a bummer, man.
So, I mean, if you go back to the early Street Fighters, the windows for things were so tight that it was a problem, right? And so that they've been releasing that over time, giving people more time in between, or you can have a couple of extra inputs between the inputs that are necessary for a command, and you'll still get your stuff, you get shortcuts, all of those kinds of things. But it seems like maybe we've gone a little bit too far with that, perhaps. But have you seen things get better since the Aki patch with Lily and Super specifically, Steven?
Yeah, with the fix to the super input stuff, I haven't gotten a random level 3 yet, so I guess that's a pretty good improvement there. But in terms of kind of everything else or any other, interactions that I've had with Super and stuff, it feels about the same. That's probably the only thing that I've noticed so far. Other characters, I definitely experienced it as well. Like somebody like Marissa, if you're, again, walk back, then you try to do like Superman Punch or something, you get random level 1 super. Haven't played her after the patch, so I'm not sure if she's still experiencing that, but it's that, I think that is maybe mostly gone now, hopefully, anyway, after the fix. But again, it's like tip of the iceberg, man. This is like one, I'm glad it's gone, or I'm glad it's mostly fixed, but there's so much more to the inputs, like the input issues that, yeah.
Well, John, before this, you were talking a little bit about the kind of updated approaches that we do know that Capcom has taken to priorities. Can you talk a little bit to what the differences in Street Fighter 6 are to previous Street Fighter entries?
Yeah, this data comes from Loic Wide-Pettit, and I'm sure I messed up his name, so if he wants to ping me on Twitter about that, he can tell me how to pronounce it correctly. But based on how move priority works from Street Fighter 5 to 6, you'll get accidental supers more often because the move priority for them was increased a good bit. That was something I had to get used to by playing JP. Accidental supers with him are very common. And then going back to Lily here real quick, her recovery after a Condor Spire, which is, one of her main attacks, a really great attack, and then you want to win stock basically pretty much right after that because she pushes you so far away, and you want to get it basically frame perfect. You want to do it perfect, and if you do not do it perfectly, that is so often where I got SPDs, random other stuff, and it's one of the weirdest situations I've ever felt playing a Street Fighter game, because the input buffer window seems to like quadruple there or do something weird. I don't know what happens, but you're stuck in the weirdest of states after a Condor Spire, and if you don't do your win stock perfectly, you're getting something else, is what I felt like. And Lily is one of the weirdest characters I've ever played in a Street Fighter game because of her inputs. Her inputs are insane.
The first place my mind goes there is that there's always the same input for doing that Condor Spire, right? The quarter circle forward and punches. It's like maybe it's sampling from the end of that input and using part of that towards, your next thing that you're doing. And so even though you're trying to do, is it quarter circle back and a punch to do the wind stop?
Yeah, light punch. Usually.
Maybe you're getting like the forward or the down forward or something like that mixed in there. Yeah, and so
or the Condor Spire hasn't recovered, like you haven't recovered fully for it, so you're buffering the input like a little too much or something like that, and the game is reading it weird. It is so odd. It defies some logic in terms of like what I'm used to with Street Fighter inputs. Literally the craziest input I've seen in Street Fighter, and been playing this game for over 30 years.
And here's the thing. It might be that as we inspect this and as we look at the frames and go frame by frame and see the inputs and everything, it makes a logical sense within the vacuum of Street Fighter 6. But a problem here is that there is an established understanding of what's going to happen and how long buffer periods are. And to deviate too quickly from that is to really frustrate a lot of players. And it feels like it's not all the time in Street Fighter 6. It's only in certain scenarios where other times I can rely on my understandings and my muscle memory. Let's say that my muscle memory as a more veteran Street Fighter player, I can rely on that to have certain things happen at certain times. And we're talking about 60ths of a second here. It's very important to be precise. Other times that gets fudged just a little bit and it's just the worst. Did you have something you wanted to add on there, John?
Yeah, You were talking about the difference, that I wanted to get into that because input buffer windows, many of them were changed from 5 to 6, with 6 having one less frame of input buffering to work with. So buffer windows are more strict in Street Fighter 6 than they were in 5, like pretty much across the board. About 1 frame across the board, but a few moves like you were talking about the amnesia command for JP, that's 2 frames. There's a few of those. So some examples here are your dragon punches and fireballs. Both have 1 frame tighter input windows that you have to input the command successfully in than it was in Street Fighter 5. So if you played the prior game for many years, you got used to a little bit more free-flowing inputs, and coming into Street Fighter 6 is a culture shock on top of all the other input priorities and all the other kind of stuff we're talking about. It's not just one thing here that's standing out, it's like multitudes of things all kind of feeding into like one central input issue basically across the game.
Well, okay, so you talked earlier about the drive rush scenario, and the resolution after drive rush being a particularly sticky situation, and many people will say that drive rush eats inputs. Okay, this has actually been put under the microscope, I think somewhat thoroughly, again by Big Nasty Kale, and the findings are that it doesn't actually eat inputs. But here's the thing. I'm trying to be as streamlined about this as possible, but every time your character enters a state where you are locked into an animation, whether that be a block stun animation, a hit animation, your character doing a move, or let's say when you're waking up, right? There's a period where you can't do anything, and if you input something, the game will indeed just eat it, and that's proper. That's what's supposed to happen because you can't do something during these locked out moments, right? And if you watch, and this will be on the screen as well, there's a buffer bar in the training mode that shows you how long your character is locked out of being able to do anything. And it's a bar that fills up with red, and then it very quickly depletes, and then there's a little line at the end of it, just before the end of it, that marks your buffer area, where even though your character is still locked out of animation, if you input anything during that little bit before it's over, you can input it. The game will read it, and then that's why you can do things immediately as you get out of these animations or as you wake up. Instead of if that wasn't there, then you would have to begin entering the animation or begin entering your DP after your character wakes up, and a meaty would beat you every time, and it would just it doesn't work. So that's why that's there in the first place. Okay, so we have been trained as veteran players to kind of feel and know when that little buffer area is. So that's when we enter our reversals or the next thing that we want to do. Here's the thing. Parry does not register in that buffer area. Okay, if you input parry, and this is true of whether you're pressing medium punch and medium kick at the same time, or if you're using modern controls, there's just a straight up button for parry. If you press either of those things during that time, you will not get parry. You'll get, if it's both buttons, you'll get a medium kick. And what happens there is that if you're trying to parry, then your character is going to try to do a medium kick. It's just going to get hit by the next thing that's coming in. That's super frustrating. But knowing that is really important. Here's the other thing, and kind of the answer to my personal issue of when I'm trying to get something on wake up and whatnot. So say you're knocked down and your opponent is applying drive rush pressure, or they drive rush in the frames just before you wake up. When that happens, it freezes the decay of that bar. So it stops it from getting to that buffer zone just by a little bit. But if I'm trying to input, which is now, like you said, John, more strict, down, two kicks to get something like OD Amnesia, and that gets delayed just a little bit, then I'm very likely getting maybe the first of those 2 downs before I hit that buffer window. And so now I haven't gotten the entire input within where I need to get it, and then my character wakes up and I've done it too quickly. And it is maddening because then you just wake up and you're like, yes, I see they've done the thing that I'm countering, and here it goes. Oh, I just got hit and now I'm dead. Yeah, and that sucks so bad. Go ahead, Steven.
Yeah, Velociraptor, you and I did some testing on that front and kind of tried to figure out what was going on there. I think the basic solution was essentially perform your counter just a little bit later. And it's
that would be the answer.
Yeah, it's like a hair off of what you normally expect. But then it's like I try to do that, and then I get I try to do wake up super, but drive rush is so fast. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna do it later. Now they're hitting me during the input, and I'm just getting counter hit anyway. And it's like I didn't do it fast enough and in that window enough, and it's frustrating. It's like I knew it. I knew to do it later. I knew the drive rush was coming. Knew they were gonna commit to a drive rush in heavy punch, whatever. You're gonna get level 1 super. Nope, got cracked, and you go, damn, like where is that window? It's so tight to figure out, and like because it throws you off of your muscle memory, like you said. Like as experienced fighting game players, we're like, oh, we know intrinsically this is when we're supposed to buffer and counter. Like we know the flow of matches, how this stuff works. It's a feeling, right? It becomes second nature. But now that's shifted slightly, and in fighting games, especially at a high level, if anything is even a frame off, a hair off, it can throw everything out of whack. So you get into these situations.
Guys.
Yeah, it's rough.
When is drive rush ever a factor in Street Fighter 6?
That's the thing. So drive rush. Here are my questions, and I asked this to you guys. I asked this to the viewers. Okay, so knowing this, then do we move forward saying, okay, Street Fighter 6 is a different beast, because if we want the drive rush mechanic, if we want Street Fighter 6 as it exists, then we also have to be comfortable with the fact that the game has these freezes, and that's going to shift things. Then is the onus on the players to eventually, over time, develop an updated muscle memory that takes this all into account? And that's the first place my mind goes. But then I go, well, yeah, but this doesn't happen all the time. It happens a lot, but it's sporadic. So it only happens when you see drive rush, and I suppose in theory you could become in tune with just the very specific moments that drive rush happens and delay and all that. But man, that's a lot of getting in tune. That's a lot of frustrated misses. And even here, what are we, like 4 months after the release of Street Fighter 6, a lot of top players still complaining, still expressing distaste on Twitter that this is a thing, because expectations are a thing, and this is really a hard concept experience to go through. But what do you guys think there? Is it something that we need to adapt to, or is it something that Capcom should, if they even can at this point, without changing Street Fighter 6 completely, attend to on their side? John.
So now that they know it's a bug, and I think that this might get attended to in the future, like it's starting to be documented now. Maybe they weren't aware of it themselves. They just kind of, moved past it. But Serlin was talking about this when he was working on Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo HD Remix, that he was changing some of the inputs around to make them easier and stuff. And sometimes when you're doing that, there's a cascade effect in the code, and it has unintended consequences elsewhere that messes stuff up big time. Yeah. And that's one of the things I wonder about here. Is it basically is something with the Reach for the Moon engine, or something in Street Fighter 6's code itself, that they weren't able to properly address the drive rush stuff, because they have really good players at Capcom that I can't imagine them not drive rushing like crazy, just like everyone else in the community, and not seeing this themselves and being like, oh man, this sucks. How come I'm not able to react on time? Take this back to the programmers, have them fix it. I think it's a kind of a long-standing bug in this game, that it's not working as it should. Because when you have something so crucial to the gameplay like drive rush, and you can't react to it like you normally can, that's messed up. That is a big time black eye for Capcom.
Steven, any thoughts there?
Yeah, to answer your question, I think it's a bit of both. I do think there's a little bit of a, we've got to adapt to some of this stuff, but also looking at that interaction specifically and how parry gets eaten up and doesn't work at all and stuff like that. There's something there that Capcom needs to really drill down into it and really figure out what's going on and how to fix it, because for certain characters, drive rush is just like the advantage is so, or the benefit is so much in their favor, that it's like, okay, if that's the case, then you need to make it so that the defender has an actual chance to get out of it, right? Like that has to be it should not be so heavily skewed for characters like Jury and DJ, where it's like one knockdown and then you're in the vortex, right? And it's like, well, can I parry it? If I parried at the wrong time, I'm getting opened up. Can I even level 1 super on wake up? Can I do anything? No, I just got to eat it. Oh, they did Jury did 3 medium attacks and kept me in the block string, and here we go. Like, come on, man. Like, you've got to look at that interaction and make it so that people can actually defend against it. And then the other side of it is probably you're looking at specific characters getting their drive rushes nerfed, because DJ, Jury, Ken, come on, man. Like, some of that stuff is like, it's so skewed in their favor. You go, I mean, like, if they're doing it randomly and neutral, you can stop it, sure. I mean, it's still hard, but you can absolutely do it. I do it all the time. It's once they get the knockdown, then it's like, okay, man, like, it's already hard enough, and now I'm fighting Street Fighter 6's inputs. I'm fighting rollback frames. I'm fighting delay. Like, am I gonna have any chance of getting out of this, or what's gonna happen? So I think
patriarchy's in there somewhere too. Yeah, I hear you, man. It's like it's an uphill battle. At the same time, okay, so if the problem is not entirely, but very much so in the fact that Drive Rush causes a flash, right? Not unlike when a super, or like go back to Street Fighter 4's Ultras, that's a good one too. There's long, real big flash there, but that's not as intrusive because it's so big. You can kind of see and react to it in a way that you just can't react to the flash and the effects of the flash of a Drive Rush. That flash, as far as I understand, and this is just me kind of going off the cuff here, spitballing, trying to figure out a solution here. That flash is there for the benefit of the defender, is it not? Because it gives you a moment to see that the opponent is drive rushing and coming at you. Ironically, it seems that it actually is benefiting the aggressor in this case. What if Capcom got rid of the flash aspect, didn't freeze the game at all when someone activates Drive Rush, but instead slowed the startup of a Drive Rush by 1 or 2 frames. And so it was all much more of a fluid motion, but it didn't have that screen flash aspect, which seems to be such a big problem. I'm no expert, but to me, that sounds like a pretty quick fix to a lot of this issue. What do you guys think of that?
It's potential that could work out, but there's so many unintended consequences when you're doing programming that something like that could actually have gigantic major repercussions in a very negative way. So on the surface, it definitely could work, but it's also the type of thing where you're starting to mess with inputs like that. Like, now the move is, it needs to be like 1 or 2 frames slower would probably not do it because
sure,
that's still
4, 16, 7,000.
Yeah, so 5, 6, something like that. Yeah, but what does that do to characters' combos at that point in time? Do all the combos still work? How do these things go about?
Well,
does the input priority system mess with it?
And I guess this isn't quite your point, but how many frames does the flash tend to add to the equation? And I would just say add that many frames to the startup of a Drive Rush, and now you still have the same amount of time to react in theory. The same amount of that doesn't change the distance or anything, but it should get rid of this thing that keeps altering the input timings of everything else. What do you think, Steven?
Yeah, it may work. Just to follow up there, It may work, but also may not work. These unintended consequences they're really hardcore. Sometimes you change something super minor and it just destroys the entire game. It's crazy how much the repercussions could be when you're getting into heavy code. Yeah. Steven?
Yeah, and just even beyond that, we've talked a lot about kind of what we need to do with this game, or how Capcom should fix it and change it and make it better. But with Street Fighter 6 in particular, it also feels like the snowball effect is so big, because if you alter anything, it's going to alter like everything, right? Because the drive system is so heavily connected to itself and every character and all these things, right? Again, you talk even like, you were saying there, Catalyst, like if you add a couple frames to the startup, what does that do to combos now? What does that do to juggles? Do some of these characters just lose their best tools now because of that minor change? So it's hard to kind of have a solution, right? But to me, it does seem like Drive Rush has it's almost like a very, very, very small super screen freeze, right? Where it's like,
yes, exactly.
It's almost like you get like a rollback frame, just a single frame, throws it off slightly. I don't know if it's actually 1 frame, but it feels like it's such a slight little, like maybe if they changed it, and again, we're going back to, what do you do with this situation? But speaking more to what you were talking about, Velociraptor, it's like, what if you change it to not be a super screen freeze, but you make it just like an OD flash, right? Where it's like OD, with an overdrive move, the character flashes yellow, there's no slowdown, there's no nothing. Make it
flash
like that.
Green.
Yeah, exactly. Where it's still visually, you can react to it, but it doesn't like have that weird pause, right? But again, changing that in the code could alter the entire game and ruin it, but it's like, something needs to be fixed there, because
are we at the point where we're willing to risk the butterfly effect potential in order to directly try to attend to this BS? Because I gotta say, even understanding it when it happens, I'm like, yeah, okay, I get it, and technically maybe that's on me to update and understand, and there was a way out and I just needed to delay or whatever. I don't know, man. How much am I going to do this before I'm like, yeah, I don't want to try to adjust to this. I'm going to go play Mortal Kombat 1, which is not a good example because I don't think Mortal Kombat 1's a very well designed game.
We're gonna talk about
but that's its
bugs,
own
huh?
thing.
Mortal
Yeah,
Kombat, okay.
yeah. Let's,
Yeah, right.
we're gonna play Street Fighter 5. I don't know. There's not a better. You're right. We'll just stuck. That's Capcom figured it out. They're like, yeah, go do something else, you losers, you nerds. No. Do you guys think it's worth attending to this and risking the butterfly effect, or would you like to just endure it and not have everything go crazy potentially?
Hands down, this needs to be fixed. Whenever you're talking about one isolated move changing how the basic structure of the game works, how the game controls, that shouldn't be that way. There's something in the drive rush system that they messed up with along the way, and they weren't able to fix this. Again, I think Capcom knows about this. I don't think they have a good idea of how to fix it. They weren't able to ever fix it in Super Turbo. Hopefully, they're able to fix it in this game. Maybe for the Super Street Fighter 6 coming in the future. Who knows? They need to attend to this because it janks up the game where it should not be janky. And this is drive rush. This is not something that is, a rare occurrence. This is like all the time. It's like 50,000 times a matchup. I calculated it. I went back and did it. It's 50,000 times.
Our numbers, I knows, and it's 50,000 times a match.
Yeah.
All right.
It's tough, man. But yeah, just to kind of answer that question too, I think it definitely needs some kind of addressing. But I like Catalyst was saying, I don't know if Capcom has a good answer for it, or if I think they realize that if they try to fix this, it could break a lot of other things as well. But it's that, and then couple that with just the other input issues in this game. Definitely, like all of that stuff together, and then again, compounding with online play and rollback frames and delay and all this stuff. It's like you get a lot of you can have these matches where you feel like you just can't do anything. It's like, okay, nothing came out, didn't work. I got drive rushed to death. Okay, I mean, I lost. What am I supposed to do, right? But I think that is definitely one thing that needs to be looked at. But also, there needs to be a tightening up of just the inputs in general and the priority and all these different things, because it can be really brutal.
For me, I think I'm okay with having to adjust to the fact that I can't parry in the buffer zone. All right, fair enough. And that can be a Street Fighter 6 specific thing. I need to just block, or I need to wait for that to be over, whatever it is. I am not down with sporadic fudging of the timings of things a la Drive Rush. I would hope that they would mess around with it. I guess do it internally, or maybe run a beta test where that's the case and see what the community comes up with. I don't know, but this is something that people are still having a hard time with, and it's so frustrating that when it happens in IRL, that I think it's worth taking a little bit of a risk. If you have to reset, go back. It's not a great look, but it's better than nothing. I want to see them do something to it. I'm not an expert. I think this is the right place to start, but people that know this better than me, hey, let us know in the comments what you think the solution might be. If this is a good place to start, or if you're like, nope, you're unlocking a nuclear bomb that attacks through time, and don't do it. But I'd love to hear, again, people that know this kind of stuff even more specifically and with more nuance than we do. Share your thoughts in the comments. I do want this continued conversation to go on and us to come to some kind of a conclusion, some kind of a fix and an expectation for Street Fighter 6, because where it is right now is people are getting frustrated and they're not sure why, and they're not sure if it's them, and they're not sure if it's the game, but you do that enough times and they're gonna go play Mortal Kombat 1.